Hey guys, welcome back to the Creatives Podcast. This week we have Ryan Phillips. Ryan has worked on every project you can possibly imagine. He's a creative director slash director. He's done some amazing work. Welcome to the show, Ryan.
Many thanks to both of you. I appreciate it.
All right, Ryan. So just to start with, do you want to let the audience know a bit about you, how you got in the industry, what your title actually means, and all that good stuff?
Sure. Yeah, great question. So right now I work as in on the advertising side as a creative director and a director. And for those of you that don't understand the titles for that industry, basically the creative director comes up with the whole campaign and then hires the director. And I'll get into why I decided to do the hybrid approach in a little bit. But as a director, I work pretty much the way you'd expect. I get hired on jobs to go support the creative and then execute the creative vision in a nutshell. So it's kind of what you'd expect the person on set to be doing. Typically, as much as I can, I try to carry things through post, but a lot of things now, especially in commercials, music videos and stuff, uh, editorial gets passed on either to in-house or a post-house team. So why the hybrid approach? When I was first trying to break into the industry, at the time, advertising, being a commercial director was like a feeder program for the studios. So the really good commercial directors would get brought in by the studios to direct their first, small budget films. With the advent of digital, because I started 13 years ago, all of that changed. So what happened is, because there was such greater democratization of the equipment, of the actual content itself, the studios parted themselves from advertising in a big way. And now they don't share quite the same way that they used to. So at the time, however, that was the plan. Okay, so work in commercials, be able to earn enough money to eat and write my scripts and get my first feature film gig. However, when I got into that industry, what I quickly realized is that the director has shockingly little control over the creative. You're really there just to execute months and months and months of work that's happened before you. So even going down to the visual approach, you're provided with most of that. And really what they're hiring you for is to make sure that you understand what they're doing and can execute that on set, because more often than not, the creative directors don't have a production background. So they know how to sell to the client, how to write, how to bring on their art team and make beautiful stuff, but then they need you to create it. And that didn't sit well with me because I really loved writing. I was very visual. Like prior to that, wanted to be a comic book illustrator and was doing like graffiti and in a metal band. And so I was just like, this is the best way to combine all these things. And so I figured, okay, well, then why not be the creative director and carry it the whole way through? So what I did is I went to smaller companies, just pretty much anyone who would listen, and offered to make commercials for them. And that gave me the ability and the experience to take it from the ground up, where you're listening to someone in marketing or business development who is not a creative individual. And so you're really learning how to translate their business needs into a creative campaign. You get the creative control. Now, granted, as the size of the projects got bigger, I couldn't do those things. But to this day, that's still a big part of my process. So it allows me to go direct when I get directing jobs, and then, for bread and butter to keep paying the bills, just like we all have to do, work as a creative director. But like I said, in the ideal scenario, I get brought on, handle the creative, and carry that the whole way through the project as a director then. So it was my way of figuring out how to have my cake and eat it too.
Nice. Well, actually, just off that, out of curiosity, so you talked about at the start where you were, understanding the business's goals. Maybe they're a smaller business. So would you, when you're creating the creative part, do you would you shoot it as well, or would you be the creative director, then assemble a team or get a producer and then direct the job?
Ideally, it's the latter. So
Okay.
the ideal formula is, and I do believe if you can pull in the skill set, I think that's the best way to go, because the fewer handoffs, the better. And if you have, which I think a lot of directors do, is the ability to write, the ability to galvanize teams, the ability to work with logistics to keep it on schedule, then I think it makes a lot of sense to come in as the creative director, usually on the side of the ad agency. And then rather than them having to bid it out to other directors, which for union jobs, you have to do what's called a triple bid, you just carry that the whole way through. You sort of get hired by the same people again. And then it's totally fluid. However, like I said, with a lot of jobs, they're required to do what's called a triple bid, where you have to go and bid out to 3 different directors, sometimes more, sometimes less. Cost consultants come in to look at the budgets. And so they can't do just a direct hire like that. So you end up competing against others. In jobs like that, typically I need to pull back and remain the creative director, because at the end of the day, it's my job to hire those people. Right. So it just depends on the situation and the relationship with the company.
Right.
Totally. And you've kind of we kind of mentioned in the beginning, you've done everything from commercials to music videos to pretty much like anything in the books that you can imagine. Do you have a favorite form of I guess creative that you like the most? So if it could be music video, directing, or music video, documentary, whatever it is, do you have a favorite that if you get that one, you're like, oh, like this is the one?
Yeah, I think, okay, so I have 2 answers for that, because one has to do with just sheer experience with a couple different formats, where I'm like, this I know with full confidence I'll kill it, right? Just done it a million times, and I really know the medium. And so for that, usually like these sort of anthemic, non-dialogue pieces that are very visual, that have big sweeping voiceover, they're meant to really, really get people's emotions stirring. They're what we call brand level, because they're not there to sell a product. They're there to reposition the brand as a whole. So those I really love doing. The scopes tend to be much larger. You end up creating maybe a 3 to 5 minute piece that then gets chopped up into a million different things. So just not only in my mind the polish of the content, but also the amount is great. And you end up working with that team for so much longer that it really gets ironed out. The other one that I get hired a lot for, that was a complete surprise, because I had no background in documentary, but I get hired to do a lot of doc stuff. Like, it's very, very polished, sort of cinematic documentary. And it was just by circumstance. I had done one and it went very, very well. And I chalk it up to being relaxed, because it wasn't a medium that I really had sunk my teeth into. So I was like, well, I'll just approach it the way I know how to approach it. And it paid off. And I think it's a slightly different approach than most documentarians take, but it works out in terms of being able to create a very structured, like I said, cinematic, if you will, story. In terms of what I enjoy doing, I mean, I love doing anything narrative is fantastic. So just anything where we can get people having genuine emotional reactions and situations, and we can make it feel and look stunning. That's what I love the most.
That sounds exactly like us. Well, speaking of which, I mean, what kind of like first drew you to, you know, the video world? Because obviously as creative individuals, it's easy to, I mean, there's so many different mediums to express yourself. So, you know, is there a reason like video was the one that hit home for you?
Yeah, well, keep in mind, when I got started, video wasn't really a thing. So It was still film, celluloid. Right. So when basically what had happened, like I had said, at the time I was an undergraduate and I was living in a house with the metal band I was in, was looking at a couple different routes, but I had my fingers in a lot of different artistic mediums. So had done graffiti for a long time, a lot of illustration, was studying painting, really enjoyed music, but really knew that I didn't want to work in a field that would make me have to work in a solitary function. I had tried that with illustration and I just hated it. I was like, I can't just sit by myself. I'm very much a people person. I like teams. I like to be around people that I can make better and vice versa. So sitting watching the Peter Jackson King Kong with my buddies, like, oh, you should make movies. I was like, what the fuck are you talking about movies? Like, who makes movies? We were up in Seattle. There's no production up there. I was like, only like rich people in California, I think, make movies. And he's like, no, he's like, I think a lot of people can do it now. So I did my research, and the very first couple video cameras that were shooting in 30 and 24 frames per second had just come out, and they were, oh my gosh, they were like 540, I think that was the resolution, really, really bad.
Oh my God.
But, yeah, and that was like the max you could get, but it was still the coolest camera because you could finally shoot native 24p, either interlaced, or actually you could do interlaced or progressive. And so I took it across the state and did a short narrative film, and then made 3 or 4 more. Learned a lot. They were bad, but they had a couple good moments where I was like, okay, I think I finally get how to construct this, and I really enjoy it. So decided, because I had no connections in that world whatsoever, I was like, okay, then I'll do the film school thing for grad school down in California. So I think, to answer your question about what got me into video, is that it provided one ecosystem where all of the different mediums that I enjoyed could coexist, and where I could have my hands in all of them, and not always have to, just be at the architect's table on your own. You're working with a ton of different personality types, which I really enjoy. And then we eventually got like the 5D, and then finally Red and Alexa and everything that we now get to.
The slightly better quality cameras.
Man,
Yeah.
540. That's crazy.
Yeah, we were actually, I think, when was it? I think yesterday we just uploaded a video to YouTube, and we were just, like, when you upload a video to YouTube at first, it's like 360 quality, and then you kind of have to wait a few hours until it goes up to like HD or 4K. So we were just kind of like looking at it, and we're just like, oh my God, like 360 used to be the shit. Like, you used to look at 360 and you're like, this is like great quality.
Yeah.
And then like 720 came, and you're like, oh, like 360 is just like nothing. And like imagining now that it's like you used to shoot like full on things on 540p and be like, this is it. This is the best quality we can get.
This is just and the best part too is because it was a square format. If you wanted to do 16:9, you just got the bars. Like, all it would do is cut right into your image. Like, it couldn't actually create a native 16:9 video. It was funny. My first year of film school, I had that camera, and one of my close friends and collaborators, Marin, she had the camera. And so everyone was always asking us, like, "Can we use your camera? Can we use your camera?" Like, yeah, for sure. Now we can shoot, 24 frames and this and that. And then, of course, I think it was like the next year, the 5D came out, or the 7D came out, I guess. And that whole class had these. And so within months, the quality of their films versus our films was night and day. Like, they would just have to point their camera at stuff, and it looked better than the stuff that took us all day to make. So it's pretty fascinating what that leap did, for sure.
Yeah, it's amazing. And kind of going back to like the creative directing side of things. So I know last time we talked, you mentioned, again, it's like a lot of projects sometimes last a long time, which people don't really think about. It's like sometimes you'll work on a project for a year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever it is. Just like, again, out of curiosity and out of anybody who's watching it, what's the process like when you know there's a 2-3 year project? Like, how do you tackle that? Because of course, like, it's usually on a much bigger scale, and there's probably so many moving parts to it. Like, how do you start, and how do you kind of like go from there?
Yeah, that's a great question. Typically, when they're that long, it's not because they set out to be that long. So you have to think about the advertising cycles. By the time they come out with a campaign, it's not very long before that campaign very likely might be a moot point, whatever they're trying to communicate. So just because world events, business need changes, demographic need changes, sentiment of the people that they're, trying to communicate with. So a lot of times on the large, like, brand level stuff, like those larger campaigns, they'll be a little less than a year, maybe, 8 to 12 months, something like that. And typically what's happened is their marketing department, their business development department, sales, all of them have come together with different needs, and they generate a brief. And that brief says, hey, these are our goals in a nutshell. Here's the direction we're thinking about taking it in. Sometimes the creative is, or their first take on it is pretty well laid out. You know, we want to shoot with this celebrity or influencer who we've contracted in California in August, right? Like that, there will be some guardrails that are just there inherently. And then they put it in your hands. You flesh that out into a very, very long treatment. They can be 30 to 100 plus pages that begin with letting them know that you understand their needs, like re-articulating, and then saying, hey, here's typically what I do is I give them approaches. I don't say, here's the script. I say, here's 3 to 6 creative directions we could go in, you know, and the very simplified version would be like, what if we were to do a follow doc, you know, over the course of 2 weeks that yada, 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 versus let's do a very highly scripted, VFX driven, anthemic montage type thing. So you'll give them these different ways that you think it can be executed. Or if you know it's going to be a doc or, you know, an anthem piece or a comedy, whatever, then you give them directions within that subgenre, if you will. From there, it's a lot of back and forth that just requires patience and knowing that even though some of the stakeholders, the stakes are high for them, right? So you have to really respect the amount of pressure that's on them for this to succeed. Especially if they don't happen to come from a creative background, it can be very amorphous. And so your job is really as a translator. So you're saying, okay, the reason this works is because it speaks to these 3 to 5 bullet points that you've brought up. And the reason for that is it speaks to these 3 demographics or audience segments that you had brought to the table. So yeah, then you go back and forth and you're just siphoning this. You're slowly getting down to the script phase. And once you have the scripts, then you hammer those out together over and over and over and over until you have something that everyone feels is successful and the due date has come and you go shoot it.
And how do you go about, so whenever you have anything creative, but at the same time you have to sell, right? What's your process like when it comes to, let's say if a client comes up to and there's like, of course, like let's say Adidas comes up to and they're like, hey, we're looking to sell this shoe. Can you come up with something like creative to be able to do it? What's your process like in the creative to try and sell the shoe? So instead of just creating a nice little video or a graffiti or whatever it is, like, do you have the intentions of trying to sell within any time you do anything creative?
Yeah, of course. Because at the end of the day, if you're creative in some way, shape, or form, they can look at the success of the creative and peg that to the success of their sales, you're going to get hired again. So of course, so typically what I do is I start by learning as much as I can. And that can be a pretty isolated phase where I'm just doing a ton of homework, just days of homework, taking it back to my team, walking them through it, having them do their own research. And then we discuss what we think about that audience segment is. We'll say, okay, we'll make up fake people that we think represent those audience segments and say, okay, like, you know, Janice, we think she's this, she's that, she lives in this city, and you become very specific so you can actually work through what that experience is going to be like for her, not trying to just lay a blanket over an infrastructure that you don't quite understand what goes on inside of it. And then I'll spit out as many shitty ideas as I possibly can with my team, like no holds barred, anything goes. And then I forget about it. That's probably the most important key step in this that people don't do. And you sacrifice the potential for so many good ideas and so much good improvement on what you've done. So after that initial kick out of concepts, and right when your brain starts to, you just feel it running out of steam, you're running out of ideas, then you just stop, go work on something else for a couple days if you can. Don't even think about it, and then come back with fresh eyes, because all that homework you did starts kicking in, and all of the things that emotionally resonated with you that just felt right in your gut, whether it was from an entertainment standpoint or it, made your hair stand on end, those will really, really shine through, and you can dump 90% of the work you did.
Right. That's so interesting. And well, I was actually gonna ask as well, like because you've had so much experience in the industry now, are there certain things that like really stand out to you when you see other people in the industry around you like having success, whether it's directors, whether it's creative directors? Like, do you see traits maybe in those people that are kind of like
Yeah, I think very able to get along with a lot of different people. So I think there's the myth of the tyrannical director. I think that's bullshit. I think it happens every once in a while when people lose their temper. But for the most part, the best directors, they're not eccentric individuals. They're very, very capable of understanding where a lot of different types of people come from. And then, like I said, they're excellent translators of vision. They say, okay, I know how to get other people to feel the way I feel inside about this. The other thing is they're able to network in a way that creates meaningful relationships, not just whatever the modern version of swapping business cards is, right? You don't, like, the number of times I've just swapped Instagram accounts with people knowing that I'll never talk to them again, right? So we all have to do that, but being able to create grounded, meaningful relationships where it doesn't necessarily mean you're best buddies, but it does mean that if that person needs something, that they can come to you, and vice versa, and that you found a common ground, usually outside of the industry, whether it's common tastes in something as simple as music, or if there's something athletic that you guys like to do, so that there is a camaraderie that comes along with the business connection. Because without that, you're bumping into so many people all the time, it's just out of sight, out of mind. So if you can cement the relationship in something more formative, then you remember those people and you go to them because you like them.
right?
And do you have again, it's something you kind of learn very quickly when you kind of get in the industry, that it's like connections at the end of the day are everything. And as you mentioned, it's like if you just talk over email once in a while, if you send an Instagram DM once in a while, it's like it's just not going to cut it. People are just going to forget who you are probably within the next 30 minutes. So you always have to try and approach them in a way that works for both of you. If there's something, as you mentioned, if you have something in common, you kind of go for that. But do you have like whenever you go out on a shoot, or whenever you go out like to do anything and you're trying to meet other creative people, do you have a way, like, is there a way that you approach it?
No, I think it's forget about the business, and just, if you like learning, be curious. That's what it is. Be curious about people, because if you can approach any, especially new relationship, from a perspective of curiosity, they're going to know you're not hearing them, you're listening to them. The questions you're asking come from a genuine place. And so, yeah, I think you have to turn on that part inside of you that says, I am very curious about what motivates people, about the weird things about them that they like, that they don't get to talk about in, when they're sitting at their desks or they're on set or whatever, make each other laugh, like that kind of stuff. But curiosity for sure is key, if I had to boil it down to one word.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with that. I mean, I would say some of the most meaningful relationships that we've formed with people in the industry, like ones that come to mind for myself in particular, like I'm a big hockey guy. So a lot of the time, if we're, because we're from Canada, speaking to a lot of people in bigger markets like Toronto, for example, big topic of conversation can often be the Toronto Maple Leafs. And so like a lot of the times when we're talking sports and we're talking Leafs, like you just break through the barrier of, oh, this is just another business meeting. And it's like, oh, we can actually, like you said, like we can actually connect on a human level, regardless of the fact that we're doing the same thing as a career.
Yeah, 100%. Like I think that's spot on. I think the tough part, and Ilya, is so those check-ins, right? Let's say you don't, because you can't possibly juggle all the people in your life at the same time. Like I have a hard enough time just keeping my best friends, staying thick as thieves with them, let alone dozens and dozens of individuals, some of which I've only met once or twice, right? So that I think is a fine line in terms of checking in to say, because part of it is like, hey, what are you working on? Quite literally, like, what are you working on? Here's what I'm doing. Can we work together? But it's such a fine line between it sounding like a completely canned, templated check-in, but also on the flip side, not making it sound not making it sound genuine, because you're like, let's say, like I've got a lot of my close friends love comic books, right? So I grew up as a comic book guy, and it doesn't make much sense for me to randomly hit them up about some new comic book release that they probably know about. You know what I mean? Like even that can start to feel false. Yeah. So you have to really be specific about it. And the advice I would give is check in even when you don't need the work, right? So if it's people that would hire you, if it's other collaborators, same thing. Just if you see anything, like keep your mind active and be like, oh shit, like my buddy Hans, like I remember he had done a thesis project like a decade ago on DMZ, the comic book. Well, now it's a mini series. So I was like, dude, did you see this? He's like, holy fuck, I had no idea. Little things like that, right? Yeah. That's an easy one because I was the best man in his wedding. He happens to be one of my best friends, but good example. How about that? How about that? Just keep your eyes peeled for things, and you have to approach people the same way you approach aesthetics. Right.
Speaking of your love for comic books, briefly, I was wondering, are you a DC or Marvel guy?
I'm Marvel for sure, but DC used to have a small imprint called Vertigo, which was I loved just about everything they put out in the late 90s on up to the early 2000s. I think they're actually fully independent from DC now. I'm not sure. It's been a while, but so outside of that, never really got into DC that much. I loved just how pithy and emotional the Marvel comics were. Like I grew up on the X-Men animated series, and I remember they actually banned it from my elementary school because it was dealing with a lot of really heavy stuff, like homosexuality, infidelity, just really tortured individuals who are trying to find their place in the world so that they can be of value, because they're coming from a place where they have demonized themselves, been demonized. And so that story, especially as a kid, was the first time I felt that artistically, because I'll say literary, right, for lack of a better word, they were taking the emotions of a child seriously. Like you understand, children are not emotionally vacant, they're brimming with it, and they're very intelligent, but it helps them to have the framework of stories, just like it helps us as adults. So that I just remember feeling taken seriously and really falling in love with it. And then of course the Saturday morning cartoon was dope.
Yeah, of course. And it's interesting you say that, but because I think that's why Pixar children's films have been so successful, because they have such a great ability to do that, to take the emotions of what a child might be experiencing in any situation, and make it feel real, and also connect it to adults and connect it to experiences that that they've had in their past and that they can relate to.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, man. Very, very well put. Yeah, I mean, the fact that they are the best family films, it's not a coincidence, right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And so speaking of, I guess like adventure comic book type stuff, I saw somewhere online that you
Ryan's like, oh shit, what is it?
that you wrote and directed the world's first live action choose your own adventure mystery.
Yeah. So my approach to pretty much, when I get the chance, I always try to veer off the well-trodden path, right? And so for my thesis in grad school, I was just like, I don't want to make another or watch another pseudo like student film that's like Oscar bait attempting, you know what I mean? Where I was like, it's gonna kill me. And so we had the year prior, they wouldn't allow us to shoot digital, even though everyone was shooting digital by then. So within those 2 years, Red had come out. And so people even snuck out to get their pickups, had, saved up their money, rented a Scarlet, or no, I think that hadn't even come out yet. Maybe just the Red one.
Would that have been around like 2003, 2005?
Yeah. So this was, well,
2007.
2007, I think.
This was 2009.
9. Okay, yeah. Because Red 1 came out 2007, right?
There we go.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and they almost got kicked out because one of the professors found out that they had done pickups on a digital camera. So they were all about celluloid. The very next year, 180, they're like, never mind, I guess this is the future now. And we were so jealous of the years below us because we had, just the constraints of shooting with film. It was awesome to learn it, but it's not a skill that I'm going to use anymore. But so one, I wanted to shoot digitally, something that no one else was doing. And their demand was, linear narrative. And I was like, I know the way digital is going, it's going to start requiring a back and forth between the viewer and the content itself. It's going to start becoming interactive because at the time it wasn't there yet, right? It was just YouTube. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to make a choose your own adventure. I loved growing up with those. And I want it to be polished. I want it to look like a TV show. I knew at the time it didn't need to be a super serious or emotionally driven. It was really about creating like a popcorn film experience that anyone could enjoy. And so we ended up shooting for, was it 11 or 12 days at a hotel down in Orange County. It was insane to try to script. At one point, the script was in a Microsoft Excel document so that we could organize it and like know which scenes went where. It was really hard for people to edit because the script is like this thick and everyone else's is like 12 pages,
Right.
But it was a really, really, really enjoyable experience. I learned so much on that shoot that I use to this very day. When it comes to some of the lighting gags that we figured out, I shoot a lot of hotels. So that was my first exposure to the issues you run into there. So it was a choose your own adventure about an impossible crime. It's a subgenre of murder mysteries called a locked room mystery, where it's like someone is in a sealed room, right? No one got in, no one got out. How did they get killed? Right. So that's the mystery, right? So it took from that subgenre. There's a guy named, is it G.K. Chesterton? Last name's Chesterton, who's kind of the master of it in the 19th century. But yeah, it was an ensemble cast centered around one detective, kind of a typical format. But it was very upbeat, kind of Ocean's 11-ish soundtrack, but very, very like polished, very modern. And what we did is we had in the theater, I couldn't afford to get any sort of push button relay. So we gave everyone a phone number and they would text to a phone. that would get aggregated and the choice would be given. There was only like 10 seconds to make, with each choice. So everyone in the theaters going nuts. It was awesome. It was really fun. Got to partner with a company called Wrapped Media that did all the interactive components for free because they needed content. I needed the tech. So it was great. Built a lot of relationships, and yeah, it was fun.
That's incredible.
Yeah, that sounds like such a fun experience. Like, yeah, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, I can't even imagine like writing that.
Yeah.
That must have been just a whole new level of writing.
Yeah, it was hard. It was very difficult. Just trying to make sure it all mapped back. And of course, right when you think you'd have it done, you'd be like, wait a minute, if they go that way, oh shit.
Yeah.
Gotta have a way to figure. Yeah, so it was interesting. The cinematography professor at the time was not pleased because I didn't want to screen it at all. My whole thing was, it's not going to work in theaters. I want people to touch it. I'll give you guys access to all of it. You should go and experience it. It's meant to be digital native because no one was doing that yet. This is meant to be what the next step is for video. And he was livid, and we got into it a couple times about it, and we met in the middle, and I was like, okay, I'll screen it, but it has to be interactive. I'm not just going to show you a cut. And it was cool. It got nominated for every award at the school that year, and it was the only one that got that. So I was like, all right. But sometimes it helps to, crack a couple eggs, make the omelet, right?
Yeah,
totally.
absolutely.
And speaking of your time, you mentioned you work a lot with hotels. Do you have any crazy travel stories or crazy shoots that you've had?
Oh man, yes. I don't know. I'll tell you the good ones out of respect for my current and former employers. How about that?
Sure.
Yeah. So one of the coolest. So Marriott International has been a client of mine for a number of years. Do some of their brand films, and they have a brand that's mostly located in Europe. They've got some in Southeast Asia and a couple here, but it's called Le Méridien. And so their head of that brand, they wanted to rebrand it and make it all about 1960s jet set. So just like very cool, like very Ocean's 11 heist feeling. And I was just so amped because I love that era of film. I love that era of fashion. And we got to fly to Monte Carlo and film, and then fly to Rome and film. And it was just the coolest, like just being steeped in surroundings where pretty much wherever you put your camera was awesome. Working with an international crew was great. They shoot things very differently in terms of their days, their schedules, which I preferred. And we got to we brought in a whole room. Like one of their conference rooms was surrounded on every wall with vintage, like Gucci, like real Chanel, like really expensive pieces that we got to use in the film. And that was just awesome. It was definitely one of the highlights of my career. The cinematographer and I got to then stay in Paris for a week afterwards. It was cool.
That sounds incredible.
And do you have again, you've worked in so many different facets of film. Do you have a favorite one in terms of one you like doing? I know a lot of people like traveling and they'll kind of go with anything travel related. Other people love telling like very animated stories, so they'll kind of stick to that or kind of go that route if they can. Is there one that you like the most when it comes to that?
Yeah, I love travel. It's something that I've got experience with, so I'm very comfortable with it. Yeah, I love travel. I was just in London filming for Westin, which is owned by Marriott International. I just did their brand film. It'll come out shortly. Yeah, so we went and filmed in London. That was awesome. I really enjoy that kind of stuff. It requires you to think on your feet. You get to meet a lot of different perspectives when it comes to filming. It's nice to break it up because I found that there can be a staleness with the way that sets are run in the States, that after a while you're just like, oh my gosh, it's another day. Here we go. Whereas when you get to break it up, they run their schedules different. They have a different approach to things, and the crew there was just phenomenal. I was so pro. Yeah, just really, really great. So I really do love travel. I think that's great. I love shooting on stages. a lot, just because the build component is really fun. You get to be much more specific about the design. The sets in my experience tend to be quieter. So quieter sets are better. There's less miscommunication, that people don't get so tired out by the end of the day. And I think it's because you don't have, at least on a sound stage, you don't have the sonorousness of like traffic and like people, the production bay, blah, 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 all that stuff. It's just silent because you clap your hands and it's just dead, right? So you can really hear each other. No one has to yell at all. In fact, it sounds out of place if you do, minus if there's a big crew and the AD's got to do their thing. But within the crews, everything, it's very quiet. It's very controlled. Okay. Dang, turns out that overhead isn't working, that unit, pull that whole wall out and we'll simulate sunlight through that side. I mean, it's things that you just can't do on location.
Right. Well, I was going to ask you, I don't know if you can share, I know you want to, but I was going to ask you just, for people who are starting out and listening, what have you faced anything that's like super tough, like it's just a really tough obstacle that you've had to overcome, and like how did you go about overcoming it?
Yeah, great question. I think a lot of it, especially if you don't come, and with all due respect for the folks that do, but if you don't come from an already connected social network, coming down to LA is difficult to generate that quickly enough. And going back to what we were talking about before, making sure those relationships are genuine, that you're not just flying through LinkedIn and adding people that you yourself will forget. To the route I went, because I didn't want to work for the large agencies, large production companies. I really wanted to start my own businesses. So I started one, helped start that from the ground up. And then after that, started a second one. And I think there's a lot of financial volatility there too. So I loved the teams that we built. I loved my time there, but it's difficult because you're not just getting a paycheck. Ideally you're paying other people's paychecks so they can go home relaxed. And so that the ups and downs of that got really, really pretty wild, because you'd be riding high and then it's like, oh gosh, where's the next check come from so we can remain soluble. So I think as a filmmaker and a director, that's a huge part of the business in general, is even the best of the best go through those ups and downs. And so you have to be very, very patient and don't panic, right? Because people, if you're thirsty, people smell that, you know what I'm saying? Like so you have to treat it the same, be very calm, reach out to the people, don't make it about, I need a job when those times come, because they will. Foster the relationships, and just stay calm and stay excited about what you do. And then when you have those moments where you're like, holy shit, this is insane, now we're riding high, I never would have expected this amount or quality of work, then remain humble, right? So you don't want to go to either extreme. Remain humble, because that creative, that client, that team, that paycheck, whatever it is that made it so appealing, is temporary. It's all temporary. So you don't just get to replicate that over and over. And that's part of the business that we chose, right? I would take that any day over, an office job. I would not survive. It drive me crazy. So yeah, I think it's when you're on top, remain humble and continue growing and fostering the same relationships. And then when things get tight or don't work out the way you want them to, you absolutely must just take a deep breath, remain calm, confide in the people who actually are closest to you, and think about what the people around you need, right? So if, let's say it's a client, you haven't worked with them for a year, reach out just to get an update, think about it, and come back to say, hey, would it be helpful if this, and this? Just leave it at that, right? Would it be helpful if I could help you, punch up this creative? You hear them say, oh, we're really strapped for staff. Oh, cool. Well, just offload any of that overflow to me. I'm happy to take care of it in my spare time. Right. So little things like that. Don't panic, stay humble.
I like that advice. I mean, I think, yeah, it's so easy to get sucked into those low times and just give up. I mean, there's there's like a graph that one of our friends showed us about people who kind of attempt something that they've always dreamed of. And it's like you're really excited at the start. And you're like, oh, this is going to be the greatest thing ever. I'm going to just nail it up, like right off the bat. And you kind of have this like up moment. And then you start to come down as you realize it's not going to be that easy. And it keeps going down as like times get harder and harder and harder. And the people who continue and the people who survive those moments are the people who end up getting to do what they love for a living. And the ones that can't, they're the ones who end up stuck in an office job. And it's just about being able to ride out those low moments.
Yeah, and I think the stereotype of creatives, I don't know how to say it. I think there's an old stereotype about creatives being maybe not more emotional, but certainly more in touch with it or more willing to tap into that to execute their work. You have to be very careful about when and where you siphon that, because you can very easily start applying that to what you think about yourself, what you think about your career, what you think about your work, which if that's not from a perspective that's driving positivity and improvement, can be quite dangerous. Dude, that graph, have you seen the blog Wait But Why that Tim Urban does? I feel like that sounds like such one of his graphs, just out of curiosity.
I think that sounds right.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
Well, check him out anyways, because he's got some badass content out there.
Cool. Yeah, definitely will do. Another question I had that I thought would be really interesting to talk about, because you've gotten to do so many different things within the industry. How do you tackle a project in a space that you've never been in before?
You've always been there. There's always something that you can anchor your knowledge in. So I'll take the documentary that I had mentioned prior. I had never done documentary before, nor was I interested in it. We were in a situation where the client, after, I don't even know if we had gotten through a full day of shooting, decided that they weren't pleased with the director, and so I had to step in, and I rooted it in the narrative structure that I knew, right? And so I think a lot of documentarians will do, like the follow doc approach. They're there, they capture everything they can with their camera, and they're finding the story as they film it, as they edit. I don't want to speak for those artists as a whole, but it's, at least in my experience, a common practice that I've seen. Whereas for me, what I did was script out the whole thing. Like, these are the answers I need to hit these critical story points, right? For those to really, really ring true, for us to have an arc that makes sense to the heroism that they were trying to speak to. And so the scripting wasn't to feed anyone lines. It was for me to better understand what questions I had to ask to get us to those places. So then I had a very dense, like, act 1 questions, act 2 questions, boom, here are the big breaking points. Here's, there was a couple different people we were interviewing. Here's where they fit in. Here's where they fit in. Here's what they bring to the table. Here's how they hit it from a different perspective. And so I think that just rote understanding of narrative is what actually made the doc ended up being highly successful for them. And went on to do the same thing. I had done that for Gatorade as a creative director. They were actually the ones who really, the work for them, they really taught me the importance of planning out the doc. That experience was amazing. But ended up partnering with Lady Gaga again for a big PSA campaign with Staples that was very successful for them. Because of those things, you're looking for very, very story-driven components that everyone in the team can expect which direction it's going to go. So, you interview the people beforehand, before you film them, so you can get to know them. And, it's a lot of stuff like that in hindsight feels like common sense to me, but at the time I didn't know what I was doing.
Right.
Totally. And actually, speaking of Lady Gaga, I know last time we talked, you spoke very highly of her as a creative. What was it like working with her, and what was her creative like?
Yeah, she is an engine of creative energy, an absolute machine. Her work ethic is not ever to be second guessed. She really, really is dedicated to what she does. Extremely collaborative. I from what my time with her was, she really felt that the best idea can come from maybe not anyone on set, but a big group of people who she trusts, some of which aren't creatives, right? So I think that trust and her confidence in saying, is this the right thing? What if I did this? Being able to question it, not to be indecisive, because there's two different things. She was never ever indecisive, but she made sure to question the decisions first before she said, cool, that's what we're going with. And when she made that decision, then we'd move forward. She has just excellent taste, and her work ethic is extremely impressive. She was just a great force to be around.
It's interesting. I think the longer that we're part of this industry, and I feel like it probably applies to most industries, but the harder you work and the longer you work at it, the more successful you tend to be. It's like what the old saying is, like, you have to be good to be lucky, but you also have to be lucky to be good. And I think like that really applies. Like so many moments, obviously we're more at the start of our journey, but there's already been so many moments where I'm like, oh man, I can't believe this happened. Like this, like felt so lucky for this to happen. And then you're like, wait a minute, but like you look back and you're like, no, I put myself in the position where that like ended up being the case.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, man. And every project has its new challenges, no matter what. It's very rare that I look at something and go, oh, I've done this precise thing before, because typically I'm not repeating campaigns or commercials or whatever. There's always something new. So even if it's in, say, a genre or something as simple as camera techniques, lighting techniques, some way that they want you to approach it, there's always something brand new that you'll find. And yeah, and I think you do look at it and go, wow, man, I can't believe I ended up here. This is so cool. It's always surprising. And to your point, you're like, well, but I guess if I look back, and if this is a stone skipping across it, somebody had to toss it, like I put myself there.
Exactly.
And kind of going back to the creative side of things. So whenever you work on any project, of course, there's always a budget related to it. Whenever you look at a project, does the budget ever impact the type of creative that you're looking to do? Or do you first look at the creative and then you see what you can do if you can implement that with the budget that you have?
No, I always look at the budget, because we often don't have a ton of time, right? And so I don't want to waste the time of my, whether it's my team, myself, whoever's hired me. So it is really important to have a gut sense of what can be done. And oftentimes what'll happen is, as my team and I are coming up with the creative, we'll go to those other departments and, before we send it to the client, obviously, and go, is this crazy? Does this make sense? More often than not, there is a huge red flag that we didn't anticipate. We're going, oh my gosh, yeah. Oh, you're so right. Didn't even think about that. Backpedal, because the last situation you want to be in, and I had made this mistake early on in my career, is overpromising. Because if you overpromising, it almost guarantees failure, because you have to come up with concepts that give you enough cushion for obstacles that come up that you cannot anticipate, let alone the ones that you'll anticipate, right? You have to know whether it's in the schedule that or in the production methods, whatever that looks like, so that, yeah, you have to know that things will come up. Things will absolutely come up. So to answer your question, for sure, I definitely think about the budget, what needs to go where, how much needs to go to post versus prep versus production, talent, licensing, all that fun stuff.
As they always say, under promise and over deliver. And I feel like you only learn that lesson once you don't do it.
Yeah. So true.
I think that's what people tell to people they want to take advantage of.
Yeah,
true.
Yeah.
But it's actually very interesting as well, as you spoke. Like, there's always something that comes up that you kind of didn't think about when you work on the creative. Like, for example, for me and Ben, our last shoot, we had a kid and we had a dog, and we were just like, yeah, like everybody is good. We'll do it on like a Wednesday. Everything is good. Everything is set up. And then we're like, oh wait, the kid has to go to school. So it's like we can't do it on Wednesday. So we're just like, oh shit, like didn't think about it. It's like there's always something that comes up and that you have to like just move or do something differently.
Yeah, it's really true. And as I've had the benefit of having larger teams with more experts to support it, a lot of times it ends up being small technical things that they're just not your expertise, or you don't have enough experience in them, whether it might be the way we need to record sound. Like, let's say there's a live performance component, or the way we need to license the talent, the way we need to license any sort of, any other music, any other visuals, any of that comes up, that you really have to be cognizant of getting a thumbs up from all departments. But then being able to know when to tastefully say, okay, I hear what you're saying. However, I still believe this plan is sound. It doesn't mean you don't then also want the creative to be completely backed into a corner by the needs of a lot of different people, which more often than not it is. So you want to avoid that too. That's on the other side of it, right?
Right. I did have I know we're coming up on an hour here, but I did want to ask you about Masterclass and how that's been going, and the transition, I guess, from I guess you were with Lord Danger before, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
how's that been?
Yeah, it was good. I mean, Lord Danger it's a group of really close friends of mine. So they were the first production company that repped me as a director. So we all knew each other from when we were like, baby filmmakers. Then I had gone off to work on my boutique shops, and then come back to them because they just did some phenomenal growth. I wanted to get back into more edgy stuff, just be around that again. Then going to Masterclass. So I'm on contract with them. So my contract with Masterclass is done the first week of April. So it came on to direct two things, and I would love to tell you about them, but I can't.
Yeah.
They don't get released. But it's a really very, very, very supportive community. They've got the resources to make really beautiful things without being wasteful of them, which I think is a really, really big deal, because those can go both ways, right? The teams are highly, highly collaborative, and the biggest difference is they're so good about espousing learning, curiosity, kindness, and just zero egos. If someone presents an ego, they genuinely look out of place there. And I really respect the culture that they've engendered in everything they do, because it's consistent. You hear companies say that and you're like, okay, well, gotcha, nice tip of the hat, and I'll see what it's like when I get there. And I was so pleasantly surprised by just how talented, hardworking, and humble everyone is there. So that's been the biggest thing. Whereas Lord Danger has the same. They're very conscious of what they can and can't do. They're very professional, but they work in edgier content. It's more, like with them, I'd be, we'd work all night long. We'd, kind of, yeah, it was just more, I don't know how to explain it, a lot looser in that manner. The discipline was there in terms of the hard work. Like everybody just was busting all the time, as they should be. Whereas master classes, like after 6 p.m., people don't answer emails. Like it's very, no one, for the most part, no one picks up on the weekends. Like they're very respectful of each other's time. I think a lot of that has to do with it's a much bigger company. They've got a lot of families. Lord Danger, it's mostly, folks your age, my age, that don't have families yet. So staying up all night or working for 2-3 days straight is a symptom of the group of people. But at the same time, that company's grown so much. And my hat's off to Josh Shadid for doing that. And Michael Bennett. They've now created a kind of a mini conglomerate of 3 companies, one that does CG, basically 3D graphics, and one that does the live action. And so I'm really proud of them, and they're maturing super, super quickly. So I also think a bit of it is, over a long enough period, you realize what sustainability means, what your clients actually need out of you. They need you to be consistent. They need you to be, to be calm. And so I think Lord Danger's done a great job of growing, and yeah, I'm really proud of those guys.
That's awesome. And I mean, again, it's always great to hear when a company is actually like, as you mentioned, like when you go into work for somebody, it's always like, oh, great culture, great this, great that, but it's like then you go in and sometimes like, I don't know. It's like not 100% sure. So it's really great to hear that you're enjoying your work with Masterclass. And just a bit, honestly, outside of that, going back to you. What's the future hold for you? Is there any project that you're looking to do? Is there anything you want to get into? What is the future like?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'd like to transition, or just do less advertising and I'd love to do some television. I'd love to do my first feature. I feel like I've got the chops now. I've dealt with, I think, the types of creative, collaborative and business oriented issues that can come up with something like that. Because your first feature is not going to have a lot of money, not going to have a lot of time, going to have to be sprinting. So yeah, I'm looking forward to doing that. And yeah, I'd like to move into television. It's not something that I expected to want to do. But I wouldn't mind being able to do the prep, show up on set, and execute the production, and get a little bit of a break from trying to hammer in the development component all the time, just knowing there's a team there that does that. And then I get to come on, shoot, go home. So yeah, I think it's those two things. I will continue doing advertising because it's what I know best, and it's my bread and butter, and it's where so many of the people that I know and love work as well. But we'll see, gentlemen.
Yeah, I mean, I read recently an article it was on Robert Eggers, and he was talking about how when he first had the idea for The Witch back in the day, I think he said, he was just working as like I forget what it was, maybe as an art director, maybe for like theater. Yeah, for theater. And he came up with this idea, and he was pitching it to a bunch of a bunch of different people, and basically everyone was like, "This is way too crazy. Like, no one's gonna make this." And he was like, "Okay, I guess I got to tame it down a little bit." So
Because he was really into horror at the time, and like
Yeah.
his visions were very like just very
very out there.
very out there and
Yeah.
very unusual. So people are like, maybe just like if you tame it down a bit, we'll kind of
rethink about it. And so and so he did tame it down a little bit, and then he was able to find someone to help him pitch it, and I think they pitched for 4 years before
Yeah.
they got a bite, and they finally did, and they had a few different people, I think, fund it. But honestly, I think he said like the whole process, even before obviously when they had come up with the final idea and were pitching for 4 years, it was like a 7-8 year long process, right? And just to hear the dedication that he had to that, I mean, it's incredible. The budget was tiny. I think it was tiny, $3 million, but you know, yeah. But and then just hearing, you know, like, he was just so incredibly passionate about, you know, like these specific details and the look of the film and all these different things, the craft and the care that went into this almost decade-long process to have it made.
Like I don't think they used lights in that film, for example.
No, it was all natural
Yeah, it was
lighting.
all natural lighting.
And but anyway, yeah. So it's like, I don't know, that this just made me realize, because we've been talking the whole time, like, you know, like feature or television or something would be incredible to do. And you think about these people and like they're spending, you know, like Robert Eggers, obviously at this point, very established director, very sought after. And it's interesting just to see like those humble beginnings and how long he had to grind before someone said, "Yes, I'll tell your story."
Yeah, it takes such a long time. It really, really does, because you may even have an amazing script. It's just simply for the market, not the time. Right? Like you may have just missed the hump, or it just, people aren't onto it. You may be a little bit ahead of your time. And so much of it has to do with circumstance. And I think a lot of people forget that you could have something brilliant, but you have something brilliant and know the right people with the right amount of money that want to take the right amount of risk. And they think the marketplace wants that because they're a business at the end of the day. Yeah, it's wild. And I'm looking forward to being able to spend so much more time just working on narrative, frankly. I miss it.
Yeah. Do you have any ideas percolating? Obviously, you don't have to share, but I'm just curious if you got.
I do. I think the toughest thing is, so I really love sci-fi. I love crime thrillers. Candidly, I'm not the best at writing cheap things. Like the scope, I haven't, like it's difficult for me to think about how to write like a contained character piece, because so much of what I grew up on, all of my influences, they're just endowed with so much scope in order to make the story work. That's always been my biggest challenge, where I've been like, okay, I'm looking at the stack of scripts. I'm like, those are great. No one is going to give you the money to shoot. That's insane. So my challenge has been trying to come up with something that's much more character driven, doesn't require set builds, stuff like that. Let's try to keep it simple here. And so I've got a couple that I'm working on that I really, really like. Aside from that, I've been writing a lot of short stories, like sci-fi short stories, just to get some of those larger scope ideas out. I don't know if I'll do anything with them, maybe have them get published in sci-fi magazines. I don't know, but that's also been a great outlet for some of the larger scope ideas. So then that stuff, like that need on my end, is taken care of. So then I'm like, okay, cool. So now let's think about a character. Let's think about their world. Let's try to have our narrative be something that's a combination of what's unfolding inside of them and what's outside of them, that doesn't need a large world to do so.
I like that, because do you follow Denis Villeneuve at all? Yeah. So, I mean, that sounds like very similar to him. And I find myself the same way. I grew up reading a lot of like fantasy. So, part of that same genre, I would say. I mean, I love Star Wars, Star Trek, but also like more classical fantasy, big, Song of Ice and Fire, Lord of the Rings, all that kind of stuff. So when I'm trying to think of stories in my own mind, I find it a little bit difficult. And I know Denis had that same thing. It was always his dream to make Dune, and when he started out, like he did that. I think his first film was like about a shooting in Quebec, and it was more character driven and all those kinds of things. But I remember seeing an interview with him where he was having those same problems. He's like, man, I can't write anything that like works on a small budget. And after he made that one movie, no one hired him, I think, for a decade or something.
It's 10 years.
Yeah, it's 10 years. He didn't get hired again for a single movie. And then yeah, obviously he got a couple others, and then after Prisoners, that's when like things started to really roll for him. And then, I mean, obviously he got to make Blade Runner 2049 and like Dune, and like, so I think regardless of where you're starting, of those possibilities, they're still out there, and I'd love to see what you come up with.
Thank you, my man. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting it out into the world. So I got a boogie, guys, but thank you so much for your time today, and hit me up if you guys ever need anything.
Totally. Well, just to end things off, Ryan, is there anything you want to plug in before you leave?
No, just follow your gut, stay true to yourself, work your ass off, and you'll be fine. But nothing to plug for myself. I'll plug it as soon as it's out. How about that?
Humble plug.
Like a
Sounds good. Well, guys, thank you for listening to the Creative Podcast, and we'll see you on the next one. Peace.